Well, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the webinar participants today. Welcome to the iTelligence webinar titled Understanding SAP BusinessObjects Design Studio. My name is Andrew Fox. I work for iTelligence here in the UK. I'm an analytics evangelist, and my co-presenter today will be Ian Mayer, who's a Director of BI Product Strategy at SAP. The topic we're going to cover today is Design Studio. What we're hoping to show people is the differences from an architectural perspective between Design Studio and Dashboards, or what was known as Xcelsius, and really help people understand where Design Studio fits in IT strategies going forward, and nuts and bolts, tips and tricks as to how Design Studio can be used effectively by people who come from the Xcelsius or Dashboards background. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Ian Mayer from SAP.
Welcome everyone to this webinar. What I'd like to do today is really just kind of take you through a bit more of a practical introduction to Design Studio. And this presentation sort of came about as a way for me to record some of the experience I've had over the last couple years of managing the product. So I've been the product manager for Design Studio since its launch, I guess about 2.5 or 3 years ago now. And I've spent a lot of time working with customers and users, helping them understand the product, helping them get going, and specifically with people who have been used to using dashboards, or as everyone, including myself, still refers to it as Xcelsius, and helping people that were familiar with that tool in getting on board with Design Studio, because there are a number of differences in architecture and behavior between the products, and there is, when you're making that transition, somewhat of a learning curve. So really what I did with this presentation was kind of just show some of the common, maybe not pain points, but fears or worries that people have that coming from the Xcelsius world when they see Design Studio, the issues they see, and how you can work with it and really get going on the tool quickly. So now, interestingly, with Andrew's poll there, quite a number of people, as you mentioned, saying they still don't know how Design Studio fits into their strategy. So I'm going to start this presentation with just a little overview of the positioning, sort of where it fits in within our BI portfolio, and how you may want to look at adopting it. I'll talk then a little bit about the Design Studio architecture and really try to focus in on some of the key differences between how Xcelsius works and how Design Studio works. And then we'll get into some sort of specific scenarios that people tend to come up against. And we'll talk a bit about style sheets. I'll talk about the scripting, which I know is something that everyone, I think, when they see Design Studio for the first time, especially coming from the Xcelsius world, they see that, oh, scripting, get a little scared, and want to take a look at that and show you that it's really not something to worry about, and it's not as bad as you think. Talk about some of the add-ins, the SDKs, how they can help you build what you need. Point out some resources that you can use to get help and get more information. And then we'll finish up with sort of a Q&A or a Stump the Experts panel, or it should say expert today. I'm the only one in the room, but I'll do my best to answer your questions if you've got any burning ones. But one comment on questions, I've given this presentation now a few times, and one thing I've learned is that it is an awful lot of content to fit within an hour. So usually, by the time we hit that last Q&A topic, we're running up on time. So the nice thing with this webinar system here is it does have the question panel there, where you can enter questions as you go. So I would highly encourage you to, if you have questions during the webinar, please enter them there. And actually, rather than leaving everything till the end, I'll try to pause at a few points to see if there are any specific ones that we can answer as we go, so we can hopefully get at least a few questions answered without running out of time. So then, without further ado, we'll move into the positioning and just sort of look at some a compare and contrast of Design Studio and dashboards, and really, so where do they fit in the portfolio? And try to answer that question of, where does it fit in your BI strategy? So you may have seen this slide before. This is quite an old slide that we used when we launched Design Studio. So when we launched it, a few years back, we really said that this is going to be our new key dashboarding tool. So if you remember what we were really looking to do, and we stated in a statement of direction at the time, and actually very recently reiterated with a new, broader BI statement of direction, is what we're really looking to do here was simplify the portfolio. And our mission here with Design Studio was really to combine the best of two worlds, because we really had two dashboarding tools back at the time. We had, coming from the Bex world, the Web Application Designer, which had really, really great connectivity to BW and really great analytic capabilities. So you could build these dashboards that could handle large amounts of data, do all sorts of complex aggregations, drill down, navigation, etc. So really great, sort of almost analytical apps, you could say. But it being sort of you could say, classic SAP tool, did suffer from the stereotypical classic SAP problem of it was quite difficult to make stuff that looked good with Web Application Designer. Whereas on the other hand, sort of coming out of the old business objects world, we had the dashboards, aka Xcelsius tool, which was really complementary in that you could create really good looking stuff with it, right? It had that Flash interface, which was sort of the standard at the time for creating good looking web content. Very, very flexible, some great looking templates in there, and you could really create good looking stuff and do it exactly how you wanted. But it really struggled when it came to working with data, especially larger volumes of data. It used Excel as its data engine, but while that was very flexible, what we were finding is it really wasn't scaling up to the amounts of data that people were trying to work with. It was a very good sort of tool for what it was originally built for, which was essentially static dashboarding, just bringing a few charts and figures together. But as dashboards now have evolved to become these more BI applications, and people are adding things like drill down, multiple views, and navigation, the amount of data in the dashboard was increasing, and dashboards wasn't keeping up. So what we wanted to do with Design Studio is really try to combine the best of both worlds and bring them onto a modern technology stack. So we launched a couple years ago, very, very focused towards the BW world. Since then, we've expanded it quite a bit. We've improved the number of components available, added support for universes. In 1.4, we actually added now a data source SDK, which allows you to plug in arbitrary data sources into the tool. So we've extended it now to a much more general purpose dashboarding tool. But one thing we found actually is that the transition from Xcelsius to Design Studio wasn't natural for everyone. This is something that we found, in the last couple of years as we started to encourage people to make that switch. And the reason for that was actually quite interesting for me, because it wasn't actually really a technical or functionality one. What we found was that there were really sort of two audiences who were using Xcelsius. There were essentially sort of business analysts or people in the business, non-technical people who were just getting in some data into Excel and using it to create a nice dashboard, a nice presentation. And actually, if you go back to the very beginning of Xcelsius's life, that was its original use case. It was an add-in to Excel to create nice-looking presentations on top of your spreadsheets. And there were a lot of people who were still using it for that. They weren't technical. They weren't trying to build apps. They just wanted to visualize their data and present it very nicely. The other group we the other group we saw were essentially the app builders or the industrial dashboard builders. These were the people who, they were usually sort of more IT or technical people. They were building things for large audiences, and they were the ones trying to build these sort of more complex application type things where they were pulling in data from universes and from BW and from all sorts of different sources, and wanting to add things like drill down, etc., and having multiple tabs, multiple pages, and building these really more complex dashboards. And these people were they really looked at the world in two very, very distinct ways. And what we found actually is that in the Xcelsius world, interestingly, we weren't serving either of those two groups very well because we were trying to serve them both with one tool. As I say, Xcelsius started with that sort of more business focus towards the business users, but as it progressed, as more and more features were added, largely to start serving that IT more developer audience, the tool became more complex and became really hard for those business users to use. Whereas at the same time, the IT people were running up against all the limitations of the tool, things like the data volumes, the issues with connectivity, not being able to do drill down easily, things like that. And they were basically saying, this tool is not enough. We were in this situation where neither group was happy. And what we were finding in the transition towards Design Studio is that second group, the developers, they were doing quite well in Design Studio because it really was a tool sort of built for those application building use cases, right? It has that sort of feel of a development tool. It does have the scripting language there. There is it's not something you can just sort of pick up and learn, without any help. There is a learning curve to it. It's very powerful, but it does have that learning curve. And we found those IT people were generally, they were picking up Design Studio quite well, but the business people, the business and the analysts, Design Studio seemed now to be too much of a tool for them. It was kind of too much like development. And so what we found here really is that these two groups, the analysts and the developers or the designers, they really just approached dashboard building and BI from very, very fundamentally different perspectives and with different needs. And so what they needed was really experiences that were tailored to them, right? So Design Studio, as I say, was doing very well with the IT people, being more of an application building or development environment, but we still needed something for those analysts to let them work with their data and visualize it, lay it out, and share it. That was much easier to work with, to get data in and to lay that stuff out. It needed to be nice and drag and drop, and you didn't need to have a big learning curve. It just needed to let you work with your data and visualize it. So we realized that that's really Lumira's sweet spot, right? So Lumira is a great tool for bringing in data, working with it, and visualizing it, and it really is geared towards those business users. So we sort of modified our original guidance a little from a straight, if you're using Xcelsius, you should go directly to Design Studio, to really, think about what kind of user you are. If you really are that sort of developer who's building these applications or dashboards that are being, rolled out across the enterprise and have all sorts of complex features in them, or you want to do drill down, or you want to get into things like BW hierarchies, etc. Design Studio is the tool for you. But if you were just building sort of dashboards for you or a small number of people, and the focus was just on getting some data in and quickly visualizing it, you really want to be looking towards Lumira for that. So we sort of made this switch in our tooling away from having all these sort of use case tools where we had a tool for reporting, a tool for dashboards, etc., to these more user-focused tools, and think about what type of user are you, and what level of complexity do you need, and that should determine which experience you work on. Now, the other thing we realized too is that, you know, if we're going to have these two, what they can't do is there can't be hard walls between them. You know, these can't exist independently. So we're also now investing, and you'll see some of this and see more of it coming later this year, in interoperability and essentially integration between the two. So if you look at them now, you can host both tools on a common platform, use the same data access layers, they use the same visualization engines, same extension mechanisms in many cases. And we're also going to be working now on interoperability between the two, so you'll be able to leverage content that's created in one of these tools in the other one. So for example, taking visualizations and storyboards that were built in Lumira and importing them into Design Studio to sort of make them industrial strength if you need them to be, and also taking data that you've found in Design from an application that you're using that was built in Design Studio, and importing that data into Lumira so you can do your own custom visualizations with it. These are things that we're now working on. So I hope that gives a little bit of a perspective on the positioning of Design Studio and where it could fit within your BI landscape. You know, it really is that tool for building those really sort of professionally built BI apps. It's that tool for the IT people to create content that's going out, that's being published out to others. It really is not designed to fill that sort of self-service or business analyst sort of dashboarding that Xcelsius did as well. So now if we get into the practical bits of Design Studio, one thing I learned very, very quickly as I was helping people sort of make that transition from Xcelsius or from dashboards to Design Studio is that there was this one very clear rule that sort of came out, and that was the things that were hard to do in dashboards are easy to do in Design Studio. So especially when it comes to working with data, doing those things like drilling down and navigation and having lots of different views and very big complex dashboards. It's very, very easy to do in Design Studio. That was quite often a challenge in dashboards. But right now, the opposite is also true. It's a lot of things that were easy to do in dashboards are hard in Design Studio. And I think some of that reflects just that fact that it is a bit more of a development environment. And so while some of the features are quite often more powerful, there is a bit more of a learning curve to do it. It's not always as drag and drop as it was with Xcelsius. I mean, certainly that is getting better and we aim to improve, but I really just wanted to give one of the things I want to do in this presentation is give a frank assessment of where it is today. And really what I found is that this one rule here does seem to hold true for what it's like today. And because of that, it does mean that there is a bit of an adjustment in mindset and in ways of doing things when you make that transition from dashboards to Design Studio. Now, I think the other good thing about this, though, is that once you make that transition, you can be very, very productive, and it's actually not that hard a transition to make, I think, once you get started. Because one thing I've learned about the users of dashboards is they are really innovative and they've got great ingenuity. I mean, one thing I learned over these years is I look at what people have built in dashboards over the years with that tool, and it just blows me away what they're able to get that tool to do. You know, everyone sort of learned all their tricks and techniques and hacks, etc., to get dashboards to do all these great and crazy things. And once you get into that Design Studio mindset, you can apply, you know, it's not the same set of tips and tricks, but you're going to be able to have a tool that's just as flexible and I'm sure build just as great things with it. And you know, that ingenuity that you bring to your dashboard Design Studio can enable that same stuff as well. So the key thing I think that you need to understand when you're making that transition is that there are some fundamental differences in architecture, and I just wanted to talk about those. And I'm not going to get into deep technical architecture with this. I'm going to keep it very high level, but there's just some fundamental differences in how the tools connect to and work with data and lay things out that if you can understand them, it unlocks a lot of things in terms of using Design Studio. So some key differences that you need to keep in mind. With Design Studio, the dashboards are rendered dynamically at runtime. So what this means is you can't generate them within the designer automatically. Like you can't create a Swift file like you did with dashboards. So in dashboards, you build your dashboard, you create a Swift file, and it's just there, and you can even have the data loaded into it. It can work completely offline. Design Studio, partially because of it's moving to HTML5, which isn't nice and self-contained like Flash is, and also because of the way it works with data, we don't generate the dashboard at design or publish time. So when you create a Design Studio dashboard or a Design Studio application, and you publish it up to the BI platform, it doesn't create the dashboard then. What it does is it actually publishes essentially a template. It says, this is how the dashboard should be laid out. These are the data sources it connects to. And then when the user goes and runs the dashboard, they go into the BI Launchpad, they click on the dashboard, then the Design Studio backend server reads that template and automatically and dynamically generates the dashboard for you. So because of that gives you a lot of flexibility for things like dynamic layout and changing things at runtime, but it is sort of a key difference in that it doesn't pre-calculate or pre-store data like you could do with dashboards. Other big key difference, of course, is moving away from that Excel data model to really a more cube-based one. So if we look at dashboards, it had the Excel model, which was very flexible, and you could do all sorts of calculations and stuff with it, and copy and paste data, do all sorts of manipulation within the dashboard itself. But because it was in that Excel model, it was very difficult to do things like filtering and drill down. You had to come up with complex VLOOKUP filters, things like that. Now that we're seeing more and more of a demand for that, we really switched the data model and moved to this more cube-based one. So that means if you're going against a sort of a natural cube or OLAP source like BW or HANA, you can connect directly to those cubes or those queries and work with them just as you would in any other tool. You can swap around dimensions, you can do drill down, etc. On the universe side, it means things actually work a little more closely to Webby than they did before. So it actually does, when you run the dashboard, it runs your universe queries and actually builds a little in-memory microcube. And so then you can actually do things like swapping around dimensions and data aggregation directly within the tool. So that's really nice because it can do things like if you wanted to have different views, like say a sales by region and sales by product, where in dashboards that would have to be two completely separate queries, that in Design Studio, that can be done with one query and just changing the dimensions around at runtime. It makes things a lot easier to work with when you're in those more complex situations. Other one is a big consideration right now in terms of performance. If you have multiple queries in your dashboard, they are executed serially today. So they're executed one at a time, but that can be done in the background. So that essentially means that while they are run one at a time, you don't have to wait for them all to finish before your dashboard can be rendered. You can have your dashboard comes up, the queries can run in the background, and as the data is returned, the dashboard will update. That does take a little, that's not turned on by default. That does take a bit of customization, but it is quite straightforward to do. The other bit of brand new good news that we just got confirmation on is that we'll actually have parallel queries coming in the next version of Design Studio. So in version 1.5, which is planned for May, we expect to be offering now parallel queries as well, which will be a huge performance boost. And then the last difference I want to highlight too is how data filtering works. So data filtering and manipulation in general is done at what we say is the query level, not the component level. So, for example, if you have one data source feeding multiple components, say from one query you're feeding a chart and a table with data, you can't go and just say, I want to filter only the table. What you would do is you would say, I want to filter this query, and all the components attached to that query will automatically update with the new data. If you have two different components that you really want to show two completely different views on, then you would use two queries. So it's just a bit of a different way of looking at things. You don't, you basically bind components to queries and then modify the scope of queries rather than modifying what data the components are bound to. And this little simple, very, very simple architecture diagram sort of shows you the data pipeline, how data goes into a dashboard. So we have these data sources. Key thing here is we have all the visual components are attached to data sources or queries, as I was talking about. And those data sources can either be a BW query, a BEX query, or a HANA query, in which case we delegate all the calculation down to the database engine. Or it can also come from a universe, and in that case, when we do source from a universe, what it does, it pulls in the relevant data from the universe when you open the dashboard and builds a little in-memory microcube, and then as people interact with the dashboard, we're actually interacting with that little in-memory cube. So maybe I've gone through a couple sections now. Before I get into some of the even more practical things and some of the demos, maybe I'll just pause really quickly to see if there's any questions that have come up. I don't see any in the question panel, so I'll give 5 seconds or see if anyone wants to type one in quickly. Otherwise, I'll continue on.
Ian, there is one just popped in asking around, is HANA mandatory for Design Studio to run effectively, especially when parallel queries are enabled in 1.5? So is HANA mandatory for Design Studio to run effectively?
Yeah. So HANA is absolutely not mandatory to run Design Studio. You know, it works well on BW, it works well on universes. There is nothing that I am aware of in 1.5 that would require HANA for parallel queries. Now, of course, you know, everything is better with HANA. You know, I come from SAP, so I have to say that. But I mean, yes, generally, performance-wise, queries do run better with HANA, but it is certainly not a mandatory or not a requirement. And just one administrative note here, Andrew, I cannot see any questions coming up in the question panel for some reason, so I'll have to ask you to read them out when I pause.
Hey, not a problem. Okay, there's another question then, Ian, I'll pass out to the wider audience.
Are there any other? Okay.
Yeah, there's one more, which is, can Design Studio just use standard queries to Oracle databases? So can Design Studio just go directly using SQL queries to relational databases?
So no, we don't have a facility within Design Studio to go direct to SQL queries. You would have to build a universe on top of that data source and then query that universe. There is another option that was introduced in 1.4. We have a data source SDK that allows you to create your own custom data sources, but that is probably quite overkill for just going to an Oracle query. It would probably be much easier just to create a universe on top.
Okay, thanks. No more questions at this time.
Great. Okay. So what I'm going to switch gears now and just talk about a few topics that kind of were stumbling blocks or points that people transitioning from the dashboards world into Design Studio, you know, we're concerned about. So one is around styling and formatting, which I'll get to now, and then after that, of course, is the infamous scripting language that a lot of people have been talking about. So I want to start though first about styling or as it says here, style sheets are your friends. So this is one of the things I think that really shows very well that rule of mine of what was easy to do in dashboards is hard to do in Design Studio. So when it comes to formatting components, text, etc., that was really, really easy to do in the dashboards world. There were nice design panels. It was all just point and click, you know, choose your font, choose your color, away you go. And we don't have those point and click controls in Design Studio. Instead, what it does is it actually leverages the HTML technology to use CSS or cascading style sheets to handle layout and formatting. So this is one of those areas where, again, there's a little bit of a learning curve, but it actually gives you a lot more power once you get the hang of using it. Two reasons for this really is CSS being a web standard is very open and very powerful. You can do all sorts of complex layout, and there's lots of examples out there on how to do it. But another great thing about this too is because it is completely a standard technology, you can actually leverage a lot of work that's already been done. So, you know, if you have, for example, a corporate standard for dashboards, right? That, you know, you say, okay, all dashboards, you know, should follow these layout guidelines. You know, rather than having to painstakingly go through, you know, as you're building it and make sure each component, you know, follows the guidelines. You know, okay, I changed this font, change this size, click, click, click. What you can do is you can actually capture all your design rules in a single style sheet file and link your dashboard to it, and then those rules are automatically applied to the components of your dashboard. So it can make things actually much easier to maintain. And that can actually lead you to much more consistent and cleaner design, but it does mean that you need some more upfront planning. The other great thing is because this is all completely web standards based, you can transfer any expertise you have in building CSS from web design over to using that in Design Studio. And it also means there's lots of great resources and editors out there that you can leverage to do this for you. So actually what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over and just show you a demo of how that could work. My Design Studio decided to restart, so we'll just let that come up very quickly. So I'm just going to very quickly create a new application here in Design Studio. And I'll just add, we'll make this very, very simple. I'm just going to add a text box. So we'll bring that up and we'll change the text to the very standard hello world. And so you can see here in the properties box that unlike dashboards in Xcelsius, you know, you can't choose the font, etc. You can't you know, you can't change the color. It's not, or at least not with a nice point and click interface. You know, there's no nice color palette for you to choose. You do see a style here where you can change a style, which basically changes you to all the different HTML types, so between heading or standard. But then it also has what you see here where it says CSS style. And if I click that button, rather than getting, you know, rather than like you would have in Xcelsius having all these different drop downs and color palettes, you just get a box where it says to edit the CSS style. And the nice thing here is you have the flexibility to apply any CSS code that you want to it. So you can do all sorts of crazy things with your text, you know, anything HTML5 lets you do, but you don't get a lot of guidance here, right? It's just a box for you to enter the code. But the great thing is there are lots of great editors out there that you can get online for free. So this is one that I like and have used a number of times, called Enjoy CSS. So it's just enjoycss.com, and it gives you a nice editor here where we can actually choose our different fonts. And it actually, these are, in this case, it's actually using the Google Web fonts. So Google's made available lots of free fonts that are all HTML5 compatible. So let's see, we can choose this one here, for example. We can set the size, so let's make it nice and big. Change the color. So we've got lots of flexibility here. I don't like yellow, let's do red. We can even add things like shadows. So let's add a shadow and a glow here. There we go. So we can take that, and then we can say here, get the code. And well, they have updated this, and this now takes a lot longer than it used to. Or it's timed out on me, one of the two. Yep, there we go. And it actually now takes that and generates the CSS code. So I can now copy that and I can paste it in here. Oh, I actually just have to take out the little brackets here. I can paste that directly in. It updates it. And well, the Design Studio engine doesn't render the shadows very well in the preview. I should be able to run this directly. Well, not getting my shadow, but you do. In this case, I'm not quite sure why the shadow's not coming up, but you do get the text sizing and the font, and the text sizing and color. I know the font's not coming up because my VM here is not linked doesn't link properly to the Google fonts on the web. I'd have to actually download it in, so maybe that wasn't the greatest choice for me to make. But it does give you that flexibility to do whatever you want. And you'll notice too, actually, because it is all HTML5, it does, as you move from different browsers, degrade gracefully following the HTML rules. And actually, interestingly enough here, even within Enjoy CSS, it tells you what browser versions you need for it to render for whatever you've chosen to render properly. So it gives you, there's lots of great tools there to do it. The other thing you can do then is if you don't want to actually enter styling for each individual component, you can then also set a custom CSS file for the entire application. And that file can contain a whole bunch of different rules, or what they call in CSS classes. And then rather than having to enter in all the style information, you can just set a CSS class, which could be something, like, would be called something like my text. I don't have it defined here, but then that would, anytime we had a rule in our CSS file that said my text, it would apply that styling to it. And that lets you kind of create those standard templates. The nice thing is too, though, by doing this class method, that way if you make any changes in the central file, all your components will update, all your components using that class would update automatically as it comes up. So that's just a very quick demo of what you can do in CSS and how you can leverage some of the editors that are out there. One note too, I didn't go into is, as I said, things when I brought it up there didn't go well. The Chrome developer mode is a great resource for troubleshooting. If you have Chrome installed as a browser, you go into its menu, there's a developer mode, and it will if things aren't coming up exactly the way you want, you can click on an element of your page and it will actually tell you why it's laying it out the way it was, and you can use that for debugging your CSS. It's a great tool for figuring out why things aren't looking quite the way you would expect. So a few tricks on that then. As I mentioned, the developer mode is great for doing that. One thing I've found is that you really want to do if you're working with CSS files and changing them quite often is to turn off your browser's caching while you're doing your testing, because quite often the browsers will cache old versions of your CSS file. So if you're doing some development and you keep changing the styles around, sometimes your browser won't update properly to reflect your changes because it's cached an old version. So you can, in the developer modes for various browsers, you can turn off that caching. So in Chrome, actually, all you do is turn on developer mode, and it will disable the cache for you. If you're using Internet Explorers, you press F12 for the developer tools, go to Network, and say always reload from the server. Actually, starting from IE 11, if you have the developer tools turned on, that is now the default. So I mentioned before, you can leverage those common CSS style sheets to make maintenance easier. So have the rules centralized, so you change it once, it applies to all the common, you can have it apply to many components at the same time, makes things easier to maintain. And yeah, there's lots of editors out there on the web. I was using Enjoy CSS there, but there's lots of other ones you can look around to see what you prefer. So the next thing I want to talk about is the scripting language. And so this is one thing where I know people had a lot of anxiety around this when they heard that, oh, in Design Studio to build your dashboards, you have to write script. And honestly, it's one of those things that sounds daunting when you hear about it, but when you get it, when you realize what you have to do, it's actually not that bad. And one of the interesting things I found is that when you look at the things you need to do for scripting, like doing things like filtering and drill down, the scripting language in Design Studio is actually quite a bit easier than what you had to do to accomplish similar things in Xcelsius. So the scripting does look intimidating, you know, because it does look like writing code. I mean, it really is, you know, little bits of JavaScript code. But the key thing here is that it actually isn't any more complicated than building Excel formulas. It just looks different. You know, Excel formulas, you know, look quite mathematical, whereas the Design Studio scripting does look a little bit more like programming. But it's really the same level of complexity. And honestly, I would argue that Design Studio is probably a little less complex given some of the incredible formulas that I've seen people come up with in Xcelsius dashboards. They do look a lot different because Excel formulas are essentially a form of programming called functional programming. Design Studio follows sort of a more traditional model called procedural programming. And actually, if any of you had any background in development or looked at functional programming, you know, in the world of computer science, generally functional programming is actually considered to be the harder type of programming. So that was an interesting observation that I had. But really what I like to do is show this by example. And so I actually pulled this formula from a real dashboard, and this was just really to apply a filter, right? So, you know, this was a table that was showing like a product family and then all products. And they wanted to have a drop-down box to let you filter on a certain product family or sub-product. So you can see here all sorts of you know, big if statements with H lookups, or, you know, in that case it was H lookup. More often than not, it's a V lookup, right? It's very, very long, hard to understand, very difficult to maintain as well. I mean, you know, if you now have if now all of a sudden product 5 comes in, you actually have to go manually update this code. Whereas if you want to do the same thing in Design Studio, it's one line to set that filter. So it would just be, in this case, DS2 would refer to the data source. You say you want to set a filter on the product dimension, and just get whatever they selected from that drop-down box. And I'll switch over in a second and give you an example of some of the tools that Design Studio has to make this a lot easier for you. But you can already see that this is much simpler and easy to read. And you notice also, too, it doesn't directly reference the data. You don't need to have those product names or anything hard-coded in, or cell ranges hard-coded in. You just work in terms of the dimensions, and it automatically can read in that data. So if your underlying data changes, the Design Studio dashboard can adopt automatically. So I'm going to switch over again to show a quick demo on what you can do with the scripting. So in this case, I'm actually going to now go ahead and connect to a data source very quickly. I'm just going to bring in a simple BW cube in this case, because that's what I happen to have handy. Oh, I chose the wrong system. So I just have to wait for that to fail. And I will instead choose the right one. And just very quickly try to get a query here. So we'll choose a query. And I'll just bring in a data table and attach it to the data. So we've got some data coming back from a query here, and let's just say that we want to be able to filter on, let's say, the material group here. So we just want to have a drop down here that allows you to filter this table and filter down to a specific material group. I just sort of chose that randomly. So we'll put a drop down here. First thing we need to do is we'll need to populate it with the material groups that are available. So two ways to do that. One is we could just enter them manually, but since that's actually coming from the data, that material group is a dimension in the data, why don't we just get the values from the data directly? We don't have to, let's not fill it in manually. So this is where the scripting can come in. We just switch over to our application here and go to the on startup event. This is the script that will run every time a user opens the dashboard, and what we'll want to do is populate that drop down with all the available material groups. So here, this is the scripting editor here. So again, if you don't know it, it does look a bit intimidating because it's just a blank screen. But if I just hit Control Space, I can automatically get some help to get me started. So in this case, I want to fill that drop down. So let's go and choose. It shows me all the elements in my dashboard here. I'm going to go choose the drop down. Let's say drop down one. Notice we have the autocomplete and built-in help here to help you build your script. So that makes things a lot easier. So we'll, in this case, set the items in the drop down, and then we want to get the items available from the data source. So our data source is called DS1. So we go and choose DS1, and then we just say. Again, it shows us all the available options here, and we're going to get the members here. So we're going to get a member list. So a member list get all the members of a dimension, and so we say that. Now it needs to know what dimension we want. And, oh, I don't know what that what's material group called. Again, if I hit Control Space. Not only is the script editor smart enough to know about the scripting language and the contents of the dashboard, it also knows about your data source. So it knows that this part needs a dimension, so it actually shows you all the dimensions available in that data source. In this case, we say material group, and then we say we'll use the internal key for filtering and show the text. And we'll bring back a maximum number of 50. And then we want to have an option for all the groups. So we put in some text for that. Add a semicolon at the end. Notice once I finish my line, that little X disappeared. That means everything's okay. You know, if I make a mistake somewhere along, we get the little X. Tells you there's an error there. Fix that up. So it actually does check your script as you go. So I'll hit OK to that. Now if I hit refresh here, We'll try when we run it, didn't refresh there, but so that's now when we run the dashboard, we'll populate that drop down. So now you see we actually have that drop down populated with all the material groups that are available in this data set. That happened automatically. And now if that data set changes, these would update automatically to reflect the data set. It's not hard coded. That's the great thing about the scripting language. But we don't have it set yet to actually do the filtering. We need to do that. So again, we'll just click on the drop down, choose the on select event, so what the script it runs when they select something in the drop down. And in that case, again, if you remember I mentioned the architecture section, filtering is done on the data source level. So I choose the data source, and we just set a filter. Again, it needs to know a dimension and what to filter on. Choose the dimension, shows us there, and then the value is whatever the value of the drop-down is. Get the selected value. So you see we have lots of tools there to help you do that and build it. That autocomplete and built-in documentation makes it very easy. And the scripting you have to do is actually very minimal and easy to understand. And now if I run that, if I, for example, now choose iced tea, you actually see automatically update. So very, very easy to do these things. The scripting is really not that difficult. The other great thing is it will actually, if you need to update things, if you actually need to change things around within your dashboard, like let's say we actually want to get rid of this drop-down, for example, how is that going to impact all our scripts, right? If you were using dashboards and you move data around or, on the spreadsheet, or you remove components, that can affect your underlying formulas, and there's no easy way to tell what happens. In this case here, let's say we want to do something, say remove that drop down. If we hit the Find References button here, it actually tells us, well, that drop down is actually being used in these bits of script, and you can see the impact if you were to change that behavior, right, where it's being used. It's very easy to do that sort of impact analysis when you're maintaining your dashboard. It really makes things a lot easier to maintain. So I know I'm starting to run short on time. So few tips and tricks on the scripting. As I mentioned, the autocomplete and help are your friends here. Look at it. There's lots of examples and tutorials. One thing here, actually I now need to update this because in 1.4 we sort of fixed this, but one thing people were doing is they were creating reusable scripts with hidden buttons. So if you wanted to have the same behavior over and over again, rather than copying and pasting the script into different components, you used to create a button that was hidden, and then just everywhere you wanted to use that script, you could call it. We now actually have reusability built in starting in 1.4, and the tutorials will show you how to do that. We also have global variables in that to help you remember values between scripts and dashboards. Those can also be used to pass in context. Again, the examples and tutorials will give you a lot more detail on those. The last thing I wanted to touch on before I open it for final questions, though, is just to also leverage the SDK and add-ins. So one of the great things about Design Studio is it's a very open tool. There's SDKs to allow you to build your own custom visualizations, your own custom components. And a number of people, customers and partners, have already gone and done a bunch of this stuff and have shared it out. So there's lots of free components available on SCN. If you go look, there's actually someone in the Design Studio SCN section that maintains a list. So there's free ones out there. A number of partners also are selling them. So we have Graphimate has a great advanced charting. APOST has a dashboard migrator that actually allows you to embed Xcelsius content within Design Studio if you want to mix the two. We have Esri integration from Galileo for map if you want mapping in GIS. DSX, or the Design Studio extensions from Visual BI, a whole ton of new components they've added there. There's lots out there available. So if there is something that you're looking for that isn't built into the tool, definitely look at that ecosystem of extensions for possibilities as well. And if you want to create your own, it's actually quite easy to do because it's all based on open standards. So it's all these add-ins are built with HTML5 and JavaScript and CSS. So if you're a web developer, it's pretty straightforward to create your own. It uses the Eclipse framework for packaging them up and deploying them, so it makes it nice and easy to deploy. And if you are building your own, there's lots of stuff that's already sort of provided for you in terms of libraries. You have jQuery, SAP UI5, and D3 already available to you within the tool. You don't have to include them on your own. And there's lots of samples in the documentation if you want to give it a try. So I'm going to skip the demo on that one because I do want to leave some time for questions, and I'm already going to run over time. But one last thing I'll just leave you with before I open up for questions is just this last bit of learning resources. So for learning online, if you want to find out more, it's a great set of tutorials at sap.com/learnbi on how to use Design Studio and actually all our BI tools. And one of the great things about them is they're actually quite short. So there's a large number of them, but they're all targeted on very specific workflows or bits of functionality, and each tutorial is only about 5 or 10 minutes long. There's a great SCN community there. The link is there, very active, lots of people there who can answer your questions. So that's monitored actually both by people internally at SAP and as well people everywhere. I would actually say we're now reaching the point where some of the best experts are outside of SAP. So SCN is a great resource. Of course, the online documentation as well. And if you prefer to actually have a book, there's 2 great books that I know of. One is the Mastering SAP BusinessObjects Design Studio with NetWeaver BW by Ingo Hilgeport, who's quite well known in the community as an SAP mentor, and is really actually creates some really great books and tutorials on these things. So, and despite the one thing I want to point out with that book though is even if you're looking at Design Studio and don't have BW, this is still a pretty good book because despite that title, most of the material in it is not BW specific. So you still may want to check that one out even if you're looking at Design Studio outside the BW context. And then there's also the sort of SAP Press, I guess, official book. Not SAP, but SAP Press, getting started with BusinessObjects Design Studio. Both are great books. You can get them on Amazon, available as an ebook download or in the traditional dead tree format as you prefer. But those are the 2 I'm aware of and I think are quite good. And there may be others out there as well now too. But with that, that pretty much ends the presentation. I know we're up on the hour, but I'll stay around for a few minutes if there are additional questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ian.
Otherwise, thank you very much.
If you can switch back, awesome. Thank you. So, holding slide for any questions. There are a number of questions in the QA panel. Some of them are quite technical in terms of questioning around scripting. So what I'm going to suggest there, we'll take those offline, Ian. We'll look at those and respond back directly to the people because there's some quite technical ones.
That's fine, yeah.
Okay. There's an observation from somebody which was just quite interesting to share. And it goes, seems like there's a booming after sales market for obtaining functionality, not brackets yet, in Design Studio. To what extent will this curtail product development for Design Studio at SAP?
So I wouldn't say, I don't think it's curtailing things at all. I mean, honestly, I think it's great because that booming ecosystem is actually serving to accelerate Design Studio adoption. And what that's doing is as more people are adopting Design Studio, it's actually putting more pressure on us at SAP to develop more functionality within the tool. So I wouldn't say that any of that aftermarket is curtailing development. If anything, it's encouraging it, and I'm really happy to see it. So hope that answers the question.
Excellent, thank you. So one last question, which winds back really right to your opening positioning slides around your frank assessment, what's hard in Dashboard is easy in Design Studio. A question is, in relating to that, is what is hard in Dashboards also hard in Lumira?
So yes, that can be a fair comment. So I think one thing though is if we look at Lumira and where it's going in the near term, a lot of that stuff will start to become a lot easier. I know the dashboarding capability in Lumira, I mean, again, to be quite frank, in my personal opinion, is not where it should be, but I know that's also a focus area for that team in the near term. So I don't, since I don't have the detailed Lumira roadmaps in front of me, I don't want to speak to it, but I know we'll be seeing some improvement in that respect soon.
Excellent. Okay, so I think we'll hold the questions there. If you can just advance them one more slide for me, please, Ian.
Yep.
Just one thing to say at the end. If you found this session useful, this is an indication of the kind of stuff that iTelligence are delivering at our annual conference. So we've got our conference in June, based in London, making IT simple. So if you've enjoyed what you've heard, this is the sort of topics we go through. We've got about 30 individual breakout sessions at our conference this year, covering things like HANA, Lumira, Hybris, Business by Design, Business One, a whole gambit of SAP technology being covered. So there's a URL there, or you just Google around iTelligence Annual Conference, sign up. It's a completely free conference, one day in central London, guest speakers from SAP, speakers from iTelligence. If you found today useful, you should certainly try and get along to our annual conference. So final slide will be simple. Thank you all very much for your time. Thank you for taking time out of your day today. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to Ian Mayer for dialing in from Paris to do this for us. Greatly appreciated. And thank you all for investing your time. Those people who have got questions that are outstanding, Ian and I will take those offline and get back to you personally. But I hope it's been useful. One last thing to say at the end is this webinar has been videoed. If you do not, or you have concerns about your employer allowing videos of you being attending, please come back and let me know. But we videoed this for future use. So at that point, I'll say thank you all for your time. I hope things have been useful to you, and we hope to see you again soon at another webinar. Thank you all.